It all began on a bright Saturday morning, one of those rare days when everything felt just right. The sun was filtering through the tall sycamores lining the edge of my new property, a quiet 2-acre lot nestled at the far end of what most would call a manicured suburban haven. I just finished moving into the place a few weeks earlier, and although the previous owner had mentioned a homeowners association, I didn't think much of it at the time. After all, I was a firm believer in minding my own business and living peacefully. I wasn't looking for drama. Unfortunately, drama had other plans for me, specifically in the form of Judith Langston, president of the Heatherstone Hills HOA. The key. First time I encountered Judith, she came walking up my newly graveled driveway with a clipboard under one arm and a look on her face like she'd been chewing on lemons. I was kneeling beside a flower bed trying to revive some thirsty hydrangeas when her shadow cut across the sunlight. "You must be the new homeowner," she said, without so much as a smile. "I'm Judith Langston, HOA president. I'll need to come inside to perform the new homeowner inspection." "Inspection?" I blinked, standing up to brush the dirt from my hands. "Sorry, nobody told me about that." She raised one brow and tapped her clipboard. "It's mandatory for all property transitions in Heatherstone Hills. I just need to take a quick look around. It's protocol." Now, I'm not one to pick fights, but something about the way she said it, like the house still belonged to her and I was just borrowing it, rubbed me wrong. "With all due respect, this is private property," I said. "And I don't recall agreeing to any mandatory inspection inside my home. If you got something official, feel free to email it." Her mouth opened slightly, as though she couldn't believe I had the gall to say no. "Sir, I am the HOA president. I'm authorized to conduct walkthroughs for compliance. If you don't cooperate, that can result in immediate penalties." I folded my arms. "Then I guess you'll have to write me up, Judith. But you're not coming inside." She stood there a few seconds longer, her expression a blend of offense and confusion. Then, without a word, she turned on her heel and stormed back down the drive. I figured that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I received an envelope in the mailbox with the HOA letterhead stamped across the top. Inside was a notice of non-compliance, citing refusal to allow entry for inspection, along with a list of potential violations they would be checking once access is permitted. Among the items listed were things like improper lawn edging, unauthorized mailbox placement, and possible unapproved exterior paint. They'd never even been inside, and already they were crafting infractions. I set the letter down, chuckling. Surely this couldn't be serious. The next week, I found a violation notice taped to my front door. Not mailed, taped. It was for leaving. My garbage bin visible from the street. The kicker? Trash pickup had been that morning. I checked my security camera. There she was, 10:48 a.m., clipboard in hand, snapping a photo of the empty bin still sitting curbside after collection. That's when I realized this wasn't just about rules. Judith had made it personal. I started documenting everything. Every letter, every visit, every petty violation. I installed a better security system, including a camera with audio, because it was clear I'd need more than just receipts. I needed a full record of this nonsense. It escalated the following weekend. I was in the garage, organizing tools, when I heard tires crunching the gravel outside. I stepped out to see Judith again, but this time she wasn't alone. She had a man with her, late 50s, balding, wearing a badge clipped to a blue vest that said HOA Enforcement Officer. She smiled coldly. "This is Charles. We're here for your compliance walkthrough." I raised an eyebrow. "You brought backup?" Charles stepped forward. "Sir, this is your final opportunity to grant voluntary access before we escalate. This matter. That was it." "No," I said firmly. "And let me make something very clear. If either of you steps foot beyond that gate without my permission, I will consider it trespassing. HOA rules don't override state law, and under Texas law, this land is private. You're not officers of the law, you don't have a warrant. And you're not coming in." Charles looked like he'd been slapped. Judith's jaw tensed, but she composed herself quickly. "You'll regret this," she said, eyes narrow. "There are procedures for non-compliance." "Then follow them," I replied, dead calm. "And make sure you spell my name right when you do." They left, but I could feel the storm brewing. Sure enough, it hit 2 days later in the form of blue and red flashing lights. I was inside reading when I noticed the squad car pull up. A young officer stepped out, glanced at the house, then walked up the front path. I opened the door before he could knock. "Afternoon," he said, tipping his hat. "We got a call about a possible break-in at this address. Caller said someone was unlawfully occupying the residence. Claimed she was the property representative." I stared at him, deadpan. "You've got to be kidding," he chuckled. "Didn't think so. You got ID?" I handed him my license, along with a copy of the deed that I'd stashed by the entry just in case. He looked everything over and whistled. "Yep, all checks out. You're the owner. Let me guess. Short blonde lady, clipboard attitude?" He laughed. "That would be the one. She's waiting down the block. Said she didn't want to approach directly for her own safety." Now I laughed. "Mind if I speak to her?" I asked. The officer grinned. "I'll walk you down." We strolled to the end of the street where Judith was pacing beside her Subaru. The moment she saw me and the officer walking together, her face contorted. "This man is illegally occupying that property," she snapped. "He refused to let me conduct inspection. He's hiding something. I'm the HOA president." The officer held up a hand. "Ma'am, he's got all the paperwork. He owns the house. This is a civil matter, not criminal." Judith turned red. "He's in violation of multiple HOA codes, and that's between you and the HOA board," the officer said. "But don't waste police resources on civil disputes. You can't use 911 as an HOA enforcement tool." Then he looked over at me, winked, and added, "Have a nice day, sir. Looks like you've got things handled." Judith stood there speechless, sputtering, as the officer got back in his cruiser and drove off, still grinning. I walked back up the street, head high. That night, I posted the entire exchange to the neighborhood Facebook group, with video footage from my security camera. Within hours, it had over 200 comments and was being shared across the HOA community pages. People were outraged at her. Turns out I wasn't the only one she'd harassed. Dozens of residents started sharing their stories. One man said she'd once told his daughter to stop riding her scooter on the sidewalk because she looked unruly. Another woman posted photos of a letter Judith had sent, fining her $100 for using non-compliant mulch. Judith had ruled with fear and favoritism for years. But now the tide was turning, and this was only the beginning. The neighborhood had never been this alive. After the now infamous incident involving Judith Langston, the self-declared queen of the HOA, and her dramatic collapse in authority after a single calm, well-trained officer laughed her into embarrassment, Heatherstone Hills found itself surging with new energy. The change wasn't immediate, but like a storm moving through, it left behind clean air and the scent of something different. Hope. In the days following her tantrum and the cop's departure, my name quietly made its rounds through the cul-de-sacs and garden lanes. It wasn't celebrity status I gained, but something more useful: credibility. A few residents I had never spoken to began approaching me while walking their dogs or picking up mail, starting conversations with, "You're the one who stood up to her, right?" Or, "She did that to you too?" Everyone, it seemed, had a story about Judith. One older woman, Mrs. Creighton, from the far end of the neighborhood, told me Judith fined her for having too many garden gnomes, 6 to be exact, claiming it created an aesthetic disruption. A young couple who recently moved in were forced to repaint their shutters 3 times in 1 month because the shade of green was 2 Pantone points off the HOA-approved list. And then there was Raymond, a quiet man who'd been cited for leaving his trash bins out 4 minutes past the designated collection window. The trickle turned into a torrent. These weren't just minor annoyances, they were symptoms of a deeper rot, one that had festered under Judith's reign for years. She'd used the HOA bylaws not as a guide, but as a weapon. Worse, she had a talent for manipulation. If she liked, your violations were overlooked. If she didn't, you paid in stress, fines, and public shame. I began collecting stories. It wasn't something I planned. People just started telling them, and I started writing them down. I created a folder on my laptop titled HOA Testimonies and filled it with handwritten notes, scanned letters, copies of citations, photos of supposed violations, and even screenshots from the HOA's internal message board where Judith left snarky or outright bullying comments. It all came to a head at the quarterly HOA meeting. That night, the community clubhouse parking lot was so packed people parked on lawns and curbs. Inside, every folding chair was filled, with many standing along the back wall. I walked into a sea of nervous but determined faces. There were retirees in pressed polos, moms holding toddlers, teenagers filming on their phones, and middle-aged dads with their arms crossed. Everyone was here for a reckoning. Judith walked in, flanked by two board members who had clearly not read the room. She wore her usual royal blue pantsuit, pearls clinking as she moved, and carried a binder so thick it looked like a legal textbook. She climbed onto the raised stage with the air of someone who expected applause but was met with icy silence. She cleared her throat and began reading the agenda. No one interrupted, yet. She moved from budget reports to landscaping updates to mailbox repainting standards. Then she said, "Now, about the recent incident." That was the moment it cracked open. A hand shot up. "Why did you call the police on your neighbor?" A voice called out. Judith paused. "That matter has been resolved," she said curtly. "It is not on the agenda tonight." Another voice. "We're making it part of the agenda." The room buzzed. She tried to press forward, but a rising chorus of voices made that impossible. Stood up, calmly, deliberately. "I'd like to speak," I said. All heads turned toward me. Judith's face went rigid. "I moved into this neighborhood looking for peace," I began. "I wasn't here a month before I was accused of breaking into my own home. I was yelled at, threatened, and had the police called on me for no reason, except that I refused to let someone who doesn't live in my house walk through it like she owned it." People murmured, nodding. I continued. "She used HOA rules to control, not to serve, to humiliate, not to support, and she's been doing it for years." I opened the folder in my hand. "I have 37 written statements from residents detailing harassment, intimidation, and misappropriation of fines and funds. I have video footage, citation documents, and emails from homeowners showing how this HOA was used like a private fiefdom." Judith tried to cut me off, but the crowd shut her down. Then Larry Briggs stood. A former HOA vice president, he was, one of the neighborhood's most respected figures, a retired attorney known for his patience and fairness. He didn't speak often, but when he did, people listened. "I move that we vote on a resolution of no confidence in President Judith." "Langston," he said, eyes sharp. Judith gasped. "Larry, you don't have the authority." "I do," he said firmly. "Under bylaw section 4.3, any member of the board may motion for leadership reevaluation in an open meeting with quorum present. And tonight we have quorum and then some." The vote happened then and there. 63 people raised their hands in favor of her removal. Only 8 opposed. Judith was ousted. She stormed out without a word. One of her heels caught on the carpeted step, causing a stuttered step before she disappeared through the door. That single moment, though small, somehow symbolized the fall of her empire. Larry was elected interim president that night. And in his first act, he passed the microphone to me. "Would you be willing to lead the Homeowner Rights Reform Committee?" he asked. "We need someone who knows what it's like on the other side of power." I was stunned, but looking around at those faces, Faces once nervous, now proud, I knew I had to say yes. In the weeks that followed, we began rebuilding. The reform committee wasn't just a symbolic gesture, it was the real deal. We held open forums, collected feedback, rewrote sections of the HOA charter, and put in place new safeguards. All citations now had to be approved by a 2/3 board vote. No one could enter a homeowner's property without written consent. Fines had a formal appeal process. Budgets were opened for transparency. People got involved. For the first time in years, board elections saw actual campaigning. Residents volunteered for landscaping teams and community watch programs. A neighborhood newsletter was started by a group of teenagers, no less. And every Friday night, someone hosted a porch potluck or front yard movie screening. Meanwhile, Judith's former allies faded from view. Her closest friend on the board, who'd once accused a family of violating seasonal decor guidelines for putting up Diwali lights, resigned quietly and put her home on the market. Others followed. Within 3 months, over half the old guard was gone, replaced by new voices ready to do things differently. And Judith? She didn't go quietly into the night. She filed a lawsuit against the HOA, me, Larry, and the entire board, claiming character assassination, civil conspiracy, and emotional distress. The judge dismissed it with prejudice, noting the overwhelming community support behind the board's actions and citing video evidence from the officer who responded to her original false report. Her reputation sank even further when a local news station ran a small expose about corrupt HOAs, including a short segment on Heatherstone Hills. It featured several residents, blurring faces, changing names, recounting their experiences. The footage of Judith shouting about ungrateful residents and unacceptable behavior became a minor internet meme. Judith rants trended for 48 hours on suburban Reddit forums. Eventually, she sold her house and moved. The listing claimed peaceful community living, which many residents found ironic. Rumor had it she relocated to a retirement community with no HOA, no board, and no ability to rule over others. A fitting end. With her gone, something subtle but beautiful happened. The neighborhood bloomed. Front porches, once empty, filled with rocking chairs and lemonade pitchers. Sidewalks echoed with children's laughter. People planted flowers, painted. Murals on their fences held bake sales and charity runs. Strangers became friends. The community found its soul again. One evening, as I was setting up string lights on my patio, a familiar cruiser pulled up. Officer Reyes stepped out, the same man who had diffused Judith's tantrum with a raised brow and a chuckle. "Thought I'd check in," he said. "Word is this place turned around." "It has," I said, shaking his hand. "We owe you a lot more than you know." He grinned. "Sometimes the biggest changes start with a single refusal." We sat for a while. Neighbors waved, music floated through the air, and children rode bikes under the amber glow of dusk. I looked around and realized this peace, this togetherness, was worth every fight, every meeting, every awkward conversation. It wasn't just about pushing back against control. It was about reclaiming the very meaning of neighborhood.